The briefcase hit the marble floor first, paper scattering in every direction, a signed executive appointment letter, handwritten notes, a family photograph sliding across the polished tile as security guard Frank Dobbs gripped Daniel Okafor's arm and forced him back to the executive corridor. Board members, arriving early for a confidential morning meeting, watched in stunned, awkward silence as a composed black man in an impeccable suit was physically escorted away like an intruder who had no business anywhere near the 40th floor. Frank Dobbs believed, with absolute certainty, that he had just stopped someone attempting to crash a private boardroom session. 22 years guarding this building had taught him, or so he believed, exactly who belonged on this floor and who didn't. He had no idea that the man he was manhandling toward the elevator was Daniel Okafor, the newly appointed chief executive officer of Meridian Holdings, arriving for his very first official day on the job. In exactly 11 minutes, Frank Dobbs would be standing at attention, offering a stammering apology to the very man he had just thrown out his own company's headquarters. This is a story of assumption, dignity, and the kind of leadership that transforms injustice into something far more powerful than revenge. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell me which city you're watching from right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because this channel brings you real stories of justice and leadership every single week. Let's get into it. Daniel Okafor had never taken a single opportunity in his career for granted, a discipline instilled in him from childhood by parents who had immigrated from Nigeria with almost nothing, building a life for their family in a working-class Chicago suburb through relentless sacrifice and quiet determination. His father worked 2 jobs for nearly 15 years. His mother, a trained nurse whose foreign credentials weren't initially recognized in the United States, spent years working as a home health aide before finally earning the certifications that allowed her to practice fully in her field. Daniel absorbed those lessons early. That respect had to be earned twice over when the world was inclined to withhold it, that excellence had to be undeniable, that dignity was something you protected fiercely, even when others tried to strip it away through small, cumulative indignities. He worked his way through business school on a combination of scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating with a reputation for meticulous, disciplined work that would define the next 2 decades of his career. He spent nearly 20 years climbing the ranks at a competing logistics conglomerate, earning a reputation as the executive brought in to quietly turn around failing divisions others had written off entirely. He didn't lead through dramatic gestures or public displays of authority. He led through careful listening, methodical problem-solving, and an unwavering insistence on treating every employee, from the loading dock to the executive suite, with equal respect. That reputation eventually caught the attention of Meridian Holdings' board of directors, who, after months of confidential negotiations, recruited Daniel to become the company's new chief executive officer, the first black CEO in Meridian's 80-year history, though Daniel himself rarely dwelled publicly on that particular distinction, preferring his work to speak for itself rather than the symbolism attached to his appointment. Meridian Holdings, once a dominant force across manufacturing, logistics, and industrial services, has spent the better part of a decade drifting into stagnation under leadership more concerned with preserving comfortable routines than confronting the competitive pressures reshaping its industry. Interim CEO Richard Vance, who had led the company through this extended period of decline, had made little secret of his skepticism toward the board's decision to bring in outside leadership, particularly leadership that represented such a dramatic departure from Meridian's traditionally homogeneous executive circle. The company's culture, shaped over decades under Vance and his predecessors, had calcified into something insular and resistant to change, an unspoken network of loyalty and familiarity that made outsiders, regardless of qualification, feel perpetually like guests rather than genuine members of the institution. Departments operated with minimal cross-communication. Innovation initiatives stalled under layers of unnecessary bureaucracy. And beneath the surface, subtle patterns of gatekeeping shaped who advanced, who was heard, and who was quietly overlooked. Unbeknownst to the board at the time of Daniel's hiring, Vance had begun, in small and deniable ways, quietly resisting transition, delaying the communication of proper security and administrative protocols for Daniel's arrival, a delay that would prove far more consequential than anyone initially realized. On the morning of his first official day, Daniel woke before dawn, the familiar quiet discipline of early rising, a habit built over decades. Michelle, his wife of 18 years and a respected architect in her own right, found him standing at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over their quiet Chicago neighborhood. "You've got that look," Michelle said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "The one where you're already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room." 80 years, Daniel said quietly. 80 years, and I'll be the first." "You'll be the right one," Michelle said. "That matters more than being first." Their son Isaiah, 16, and increasingly aware of the significance of his father's achievement, appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas but unmistakably proud. "Go show them what real leadership looks like, Dad." Daniel smiled, the weight of the day settling over him with a mixture of pride and quiet resolve. He dressed carefully, deliberately understated in his approach to the day. No fanfare, no announcement of his arrival beyond what had already been formally communicated to Meridian's leadership. He wanted, before anything else, to observe the company's culture firsthand, unfiltered by the deference his title would inevitably invite once formally introduced. Daniel arrived at Meridian's gleaming downtown headquarters just after 7 that morning, well ahead of his scheduled 10 o'clock formal introduction to the board. At the front desk, a young receptionist, new to the role and unfamiliar with the nuances of executive protocol, struggled to locate his name in the visitor system, an oversight rooted in a communication gap left by Executive Assistant Patricia Hale, who had failed to properly flag Daniel's arrival details with the front desk team. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not finding your name in our system," the receptionist said, apologetic but clearly uncertain how to proceed. "That's all right," Daniel said patiently, understanding immediately the value of observing exactly how the company handled this kind of minor friction. "I have a meeting with the board this morning. Perhaps you could reach out to Ms. Hale to confirm." The receptionist attempted several calls, receiving no immediate response, the small administrative gap widening into something that would soon carry far greater consequence than anyone at the front desk could have anticipated. Rather than waiting indefinitely at the front desk, Daniel proceeded toward the executive floor, confident that his scheduled meeting would resolve any lingering confusion once he arrived. He moved through the building with the same calm, purposeful energy that had defined his entire career, badge still not properly issued given the earlier oversight. Security guard Frank Dobbs, stationed near the executive floor's private elevator bank, noticed him immediately, an unfamiliar black man in a tailored suit moving confidently toward the 40th floor without a visible security badge. 22 years guarding this building had shaped, in Dobbs's mind, an informal, unspoken sense of who typically belonged on this particular floor, a sense that Daniel's presence, despite his obvious composure and professional bearing, immediately unsettled. "Excuse me, sir, I need to see your badge," Dobbs said, stepping directly into Daniel's path. "I don't have one issued yet," Daniel said calmly. There was a mix-up at the front desk. "I have a scheduled meeting with the board this morning. My name is Daniel Okafor. I don't have anyone by that name on today's approved list," Dobbs said, his tone hardening rather than softening despite Daniel's calm, reasonable explanation. "I'd ask that you verify with Patricia Hale, the executive assistant coordinating today's meeting," Daniel said, maintaining his composure despite the mounting friction. "I believe there was simply an administrative oversight. I need you to step back from this floor," Dobbs said, his hand drifting toward his radio rather than toward any actual attempt at verification. Several board members, arriving early for the confidential morning session, began emerging from the elevator behind Daniel, witnessing the early stages of an increasingly tense confrontation unfolding just outside the boardroom entrance. "Sir, I need you to come with me right now," Dobbs said, his patience entirely evaporated, gripping Daniel's arm with unnecessary force before Daniel could offer any further explanation. "This isn't necessary," Daniel said, his composure remaining largely intact despite the physical escalation. "I'm asking you again to simply verify." Dobbs, ignoring him entirely, forced Daniel back down the corridor, the sudden movement knocking his briefcase from his grip. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, content spilling across the polished tile. His signed executive appointment letter, personal notes prepared for the day's introduction, and a small family photograph sliding to a stop near the feet of several arriving board members. The board members, visibly uncomfortable, hesitated, uncertain how to intervene in what appeared on the surface to be a routine security matter, though something about the scene clearly unsettled several of them. Richard Vance, observing from a short distance down the corridor, made no effort whatsoever to intervene, a subtle, barely concealed satisfaction crossing his expression as the scene continued to unfold exactly as his earlier administrative negligence had, whether by design or convenient oversight, helped set into motion. Dobbs escorted Daniel through the lobby and out through the building's main entrance, ignoring his continued calm, measured explanations throughout. Employees passing through the lobby that morning watched in stunned, uncomfortable silence, several instinctively reaching for their phones, though none quite processed in the moment the full significance of what they were witnessing. Daniel, understanding with total clarity the wisdom of not physically resisting regardless of the injustice unfolding, allowed himself to be escorted out without confrontation. Decades of professional discipline guiding a response that prioritized composure over the justified anger simmering beneath the surface. Once outside, standing on the sidewalk in front of the building that, as of that morning, he technically led, Daniel took a long, steadying breath, gathering himself before calmly retrieving his phone from his jacket pocket. Inside, the discomfort among several board members who had witnessed the confrontation began crystallizing into genuine concern. Board Chair Eleanor Voss, a sharp, no-nonsense leader who had championed Daniel's hiring from the earliest stages of the board's search process, noticed Vance's conspicuous lack of intervention and began asking pointed, increasingly direct questions. "Richard, did you know that was Daniel Okafor?" Eleanor asked, her tone carrying an edge of dawning, horrified suspicion. "I wasn't entirely certain," Vance said, his attempt at casual deflection carrying an unconvincing thinness that did little to ease Eleanor's mounting concern. "Security handled it. I assume proper protocols were being followed. Proper protocols would have included ensuring the building actually knew our new CO was arriving today," Eleanor said sharply, already reaching for her own phone. Daniel's call reached Eleanor just moments later, his voice carrying the same calm, measured composure that had defined his entire career, though an unmistakable firmness had settled beneath the surface. "Eleanor, this is Daniel. I wanted to let you know I've just been escorted out of the building by security. There seems to have been a significant oversight regarding my arrival today." Daniel walked back to Meridian's lobby beside Eleanor, employees who had witnessed the earlier incident watching with a mixture of confusion and dawning, uncomfortable realization as Eleanor began quietly explaining to those nearby exactly who Daniel was. Frank Dobbs, still stationed near the entrance, felt the full weight of recognition crash over him in real time as Eleanor formally introduced Daniel to a small cluster of nearby staff as Meridian's new chief executive officer. The confident, composed man he had physically manhandled and thrown out of the building less than 15 minutes earlier was now walking back in, not merely as a visitor seeking readmission, but as the very authority the entire building answered to. "Sir, Dobbs stammered, his earlier certainty completely collapsed into horrified realization. "We'll speak later, Mr. Dobbs," Daniel said, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'd like to understand exactly what happened here today." Daniel finally entered the boardroom, board members rising as he crossed the threshold, expressions ranging from genuine admiration for his composure to visible guilt over their own hesitation to intervene earlier. "I want to address what just happened before we move to today's agenda," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable clarity. "I understand mistakes happen, but I also understand that how a company responds to mistakes says far more about its culture than the mistake itself." Vance, attempting to regain some measure of control of a narrative, offered a dismissive comment. "These things happen, Daniel. Security is simply cautious. I wouldn't read too much into it. I'd ask you to consider Richard," Daniel said evenly, "whether you would characterize it the same way had it happened to you." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Vance's continued lack of accountability further exposing the very cultural issues Daniel had been brought in to address. Daniel's first official act as Meridian's new CEO was neither punitive nor performative. He ordered an immediate, transparent internal review of the morning's incident, requesting that both Frank Dobbs and Patricia Hale be brought in for direct, individual conversations rather than simply terminated without explanation or context. "I don't believe in leadership built on quiet retribution," Daniel told Eleanor privately. "I believe in accountability paired with genuine opportunity for growth. That starts today with how we handle this." Daniel's private conversation with Frank Dobbs unfolded with a directness neither man attempted to soften. Dobbs, humbled and visibly shaken by the morning's events, admitted plainly that his suspicion had been rooted in nothing more than an unexamined instinct shaped by 22 years of unchallenged assumption about who belonged on that floor. "I don't have an excuse, sir," Dobbs said quietly. "I saw a black man without a badge and made a decision before I ever tried to actually find out who you were." "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me all morning," Daniel said. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter, or that it didn't cause real harm. But I'd rather see whether you're capable of genuine change than simply remove you and consider the problem solved. Meridian will be implementing mandatory bias training company-wide, starting with you. Your position remains under formal review, but this isn't the end of the conversation." Patricia Hale's own role in the incident came under equally direct scrutiny. The administrative oversight that had failed to properly flag Daniel's arrival, once investigated further, revealed a broader, troubling pattern. Similar communication gaps had quietly affected several external hires over the years, almost exclusively candidates from outside Meridian's traditionally insular executive circle. "This wasn't a single mistake," Daniel told Patricia directly. "This is a pattern that reveals something deeper about how this company has operated. I need you to help me understand it, not simply apologize for it." As the internal review expanded, auditors uncovered evidence considerably more troubling than simple administrative oversight. Richard Vance, it turned out, had been fully aware of Daniel's scheduled arrival weeks in advance, yet had deliberately failed to ensure proper security and administrative protocols were communicated clearly to relevant staff. The evidence strongly suggested Vance had hoped the resulting confusion might embarrass Daniel sufficiently, or delay his effective start enough, that the board might reconsider its decision entirely. A direct, calculated act of sabotage against the very leadership transition he had been tasked with supporting. Daniel confronted Vance directly, laying out the evidence uncovered during the review with the same calm, methodical precision that defined his entire approach to leadership. "You knew I was arriving today. Richard, you knew the protocols weren't properly communicated, and you did nothing to correct it." Vance, cornered by the undeniable evidence, attempted a final justification. "I was protecting this company's culture, Daniel. Institutional continuity matters. You don't understand what it took to build what we have here. What you built," Daniel said evenly, "was a culture that allowed a 22-year veteran security guard to assume, without question, that a black man in a suit couldn't possibly be the person walking into his own boardroom. That's not continuity worth protecting. Richard, that's exactly what needs to change." The board formally voted to terminate Vance's remaining consulting relationship with Meridian following the review's damning findings. His departure unfolded quietly, without dramatic confrontation, a deliberate reflection of Daniel's preference for measured consequence over public spectacle. Employees throughout the company, gradually learning the fuller scope of what had transpired, began to see the outlines of Daniel's leadership style taking shape. Firm, fair, and unwilling to allow institutional comfort to excuse genuine harm. News of the incident inevitably reached business press within days, though Daniel and Eleanor, working together, managed a narrative with transparency rather than the kind of defensive damage control that so often compounded these situations. Public reaction proved largely favorable, commentators praising both Daniel's composed handling of the incident and Meridian's willingness to address it openly rather than sweeping aside. The story sparked a broader conversation within business media about the persistence of unconscious bias even at the highest levels of corporate leadership, a conversation Daniel, though reluctant to become its face, recognized as valuable enough to engage with thoughtfully. Daniel moved quickly to implement substantive changes across Meridian's culture, revised security verification protocols designed to prevent similar failures, mandatory bias training, extending well beyond Dobbs alone, and a new anonymous reporting system allowing employees to flag similar concerns without fear of retaliation. He also established new mentorship initiatives explicitly aimed at diversifying Meridian's executive pipeline, addressing not just the incident itself, but the deeper cultural patterns that had allowed it to occur in the first place. Months later, Frank Dobbs, retained after completing extensive training and demonstrating genuine, sustained reflection, approached Daniel directly outside the executive elevator bank. "I wanted you to know, sir, this changed how I see things. Not just here, everywhere." That's exactly what I hoped for, Daniel said. Accountability without opportunity just breeds resentment. But opportunity without accountability changes nothing. You've shown me both matter. At home, Michelle and Isaiah process the aftermath of the incident together with Daniel. Isaiah, increasingly aware of the complexities his father navigated daily. Doesn't it make you angry, Dad? Isaiah asked one evening. That people still assume things about you like that? It does, Daniel admitted. But anger alone doesn't build anything, Isaiah. What matters is what you do with it. I'd rather show you resilience than bitterness. Several months into his tenure, early signs of Meridian's business turnaround began taking clear shape under Daniel's leadership. Employee morale improved noticeably. Innovative initiatives, long stalled under the company's previous insular culture, began gaining real traction. Investor confidence, initially cautious, grew steadily as Meridian's performance metrics began reflecting the deeper cultural shifts underway. One quiet afternoon, months after the incident, Daniel paused in the same lobby where everything had unfolded, reflecting on the journey of the company, and he personally had traveled since that difficult first morning. Frank Dobbs, now visibly more attentive and thoughtful in his role, greeted each visitor with genuine care and proper verification rather than assumption. The two men exchanged a small, quiet nod of mutual respect as Daniel passed, a simple gesture carrying the full weight of everything that had transformed between them since that first, difficult encounter. That evening, Daniel stood at his office window, looking out over Chicago's skyline, reflecting on everything the past several months had demanded of him, not simply leading a company through a difficult transition, but modeling, in every difficult decision along the way, the kind of accountability paired with genuine opportunity for growth that he believed defined leadership worth having. At home, Michelle and Isaiah waited for him, the quiet warmth of family grounding him after every demanding day, a reminder of exactly what all it was ultimately for. Daniel's story, in the month that followed, became something of a touchstone within broader conversations about leadership, bias, and institutional change. It illustrated a simple but often overlooked truth, that true leadership isn't measured by how power is wielded in moment of triumph, but by how injustice, once it occurs, is transformed into something genuinely meaningful rather than simply punished and forgotten. True leadership was never about power for its own sake, but about what someone builds in the aftermath of injustice. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps this channel grow. Share it with someone who believes real change starts with accountability. And subscribe, because next week, another powerful story of leadership and justice is coming your way. See you in the next one.